Dixie Jarko, and this is Tom Cannon.
Hello.
For Authors Showcase. And today we're talking to David Michael Williams.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you start out by telling us about your most recent book that came out?
Sure. My most recent book is If Sin Dwells Deep, and that is actually a parallel novel to my book that came out prior to that one. So it's book 2 in the Soul Sleep cycle, and it's a speculative fiction series, and to put it in a nutshell, it's about people who have the ability to go into other people's dreams and all the psychological mayhem that results from that.
You have several books out. You have several trilogies, chronicles.
I have a trilogy out, the Renegade Chronicles, which is very standard, I should say traditional, sword and sorcery fantasy,
Oh, cool.
so adventures with knights and pirates and magic. So that's very much entrenched in the genre. Whereas my new series, the Soul Sleep Cycle, is a mashup of many different genres. So there's fantasy overtones, there's sci-fi, there's paranormal, suspense. So it's a grand experiment that I'd like to just call wonderfully weird.
Now, you have a kind of a unique approach to getting your books out. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I started an LLC called 1 Million Words because I knew at a certain point that I wanted to go have more control, be in charge of my own destiny,
Now,
so
what's
to
an
speak.
LLC?
Limited liability company.
So you started a company.
Right. So technically, I'm sort of an indie press or a micro press.
Yeah, you're yeah.
But it's still, I follow some of the same steps that anyone who would be self-published would do. I just, in some ways, I have a business plan, I have a marketing plan. I try to keep it at a very professional level. And the LLC, setting that up was part of keeping myself on task with keeping a high caliber of quality, but also for some legal protection.
Okay. Yeah, there's many avenues that people can go, if you're going to go self-publishing, but it seems like that is a good way to do it, and so you have your own publishing house, so it's not like it doesn't say CreateSpace.
Right. Yeah. There's some advantage to doing that. I often wonder how much people really look at who the publisher is.
True.
I think
True.
some people do. I think there is still somewhat of a stigma of the self-published author, because if anybody can do it, then everybody can do it, and quality is all over the board. So I do think there are those who look for the publisher name.
But you sound more like you've got a marketing plan. Tell us about the business plan and the marketing plan and why that worked well for you. Because I think most people just write a book and then are like, oh my gosh, what do I do? But you sound like you've put thought ahead of writing.
Yeah, I think part of the advantage for me was I had books ready to go. So I kind of can switch gears. I still want to be creative. I still want to have, productivity on the literary side. But because I had a trilogy that was waiting to go, and agents didn't seem to be interested in representing it, and I'm like, I know I'm going to try self-publishing if I don't get any bites on the Soul Sleep cycle. So I had 3 books, and I could take some time. Do I put them all out at once? Do I do them one at a time? Do I start with paperback and then do? And
so
then
you did a lot of
ebook?
Research?
Yes.
I was going to say,
Yes.
how did you figure all this out? Just by...
A lot of research. I'm in some ways fortunate that I really glom onto the creative right side of the brain, but then there's a part of my left side of the brain that loves organization and spreadsheets. And so for me it was, okay, I know what the end result is. How do I reverse engineer so I can create the product I want? But then you're right, then there's the marketing, there's, and what's fascinating about the self-publishing is there's so many things that rely on other things. So I can't tell my cover designer the dimensions for the cover till I know the spine width. Well, I don't know the spine width until I lay out the interior to at least a certain degree, so I know the width of the spine, and then I can't get them the UPC on the back, the barcode, until I know what the price is, but I don't know the price until I know how many pages my book is. So there's a lot of moving parts to keep track of, and it's a challenge, but every time I do it, it becomes a little bit easier until they change how something is done. Such as the recent announcement of CreateSpace going away and becoming all Kindle, and
and not necessarily bash people create space. I actually have a book I made to create space, and it can be a good tool.
Oh, absolutely.
But it just seems like you said, the agents weren't looking at it, and the agents and publishers are looking for something that's very marketable.
Mm-hmm.
So if you know that if you have something good that can write, it's just you have to create your own market.
You do.
And your own readership, then an LLC and kind of creating your own little company has a lot of advantages.
So what are the advantages of doing it that way versus just doing a create space?
Well, to be completely transparent, I have been using CreateSpace.
Okay.
So CreateSpace, like you said, you can either let CreateSpace put their name on it if you don't want to buy your own, ISBN, if you don't want to, buy your own barcodes. You can just say, hey, CreateSpace, take care of that. It's cheaper. But again, there's the perception of being professional
and getting it into bookstores. Bookstores don't typically want it.
No, they don't. And walking into a Books A Million and I say, hey, I'm a local author. Do you want my books? Well, if you're not through our main distributor, keep on walking. We can't do anything for you.
Yeah.
So
they legally can't take you.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was, a book world in Fond du Lac where I lived for a while, and went in there and talked about selling on consignment. That's an option, but when you look at the percentage they take, it's really a lot of weighing the benefits. And is it worth my time for X amount of profit per book sold to do that when, most people are buying things online? And so you do lose out by, whether you're a self-publisher or an indie publisher. There are certain avenues that become much more difficult, or you have to price things a lot higher in order to actually make money per unit.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of research. The research doesn't end. It doesn't ever end because things are
They're
constantly
always
changing.
it, yeah.
Absolutely.
So your advice to somebody who's thinking about going self-publishing would be just to research and have a marketing plan, I take it?
I definitely would say yes to a marketing plan. I think there probably is nothing more discouraging for someone who's very creative and has poured their heart and soul into writing a book, and then putting it out and saying it's available, and then there's crickets.
Yeah.
There's no
Oh, yeah.
sale. I think if I had done that, in my 20s, when some of the early drafts of my novels were done, I would have just been devastated. So I do think that if you are planning to do this alone, if you're planning to be a self-publisher, you also are a self-marketer. You're also a self-promoter, and you have to approach it with some level of business savvy. Mm-hmm. As far as whether or not to set up an LLC, I think that really depends on one's goals. If I'm someone who has written sort of something that's autobiographical and I want to put it out there, I know my family's going to love it, and I know there's a circle of people who will want it, and I'm putting my story out in some way that's consumable, I think maybe you don't need to. Mm-hmm. But if your goal is to continue to produce and you're looking at the long term and building upon the successes of the others, I think there are definitely some advantages to doing that. And I alluded to the legal side of things. If I'm putting out books and there's any sort of liability, I don't want there to be losing my house or affecting my livelihood, my family.
Could there be?
Well, for example, before I did these books, my wife and I, as a passion project, wrote a children's book, and it was a passion project. But we also knew, hey, we want to put this out into the world. At that time, my agent was still trying to get some sales on the other side, but I wanted to know what my options were. So this was a good experiment to see how all this worked. And the book came out, and it was out for no more than a couple of months when we were told, well, your title character, who's in the title of the book and mentioned all throughout, that the word we thought we made up is actually trademarked, and you're in violation.
Wow.
And you hear all the time, well, you don't have to worry about titles because you can't copyright a title.
Yeah.
But if there's if I say I hate Coca-Cola as the title of my book, I'm pretty sure
yeah.
Coca-Cola is going to have a
you.
problem with that. So even this word we thought we had made up, someone else is saying protecting their rights, which they ought to do, otherwise they'll lose their trademark. So there's just you don't know what you don't know. So I wanted to have some level of protection, so I didn't. My first series, the Renegade Chronicles, I have so many names that I've made up, places I've made up. So you bet I go
you do.
right.
Yeah.
So I go through the trademark database for all of those terms, even just common names in my new series. Even these are Vincent Cruz is my main character. If there's like a Vincent Cruz brand something, I should know that before I try to put that out there.
That's fascinating.
So again, I think it was one of those very unlikely things to have happened, but I'm not going to let it happen again.
But a
So
good learning experience.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
So tell us about your marketing plan. What does that look like? How many years does it stretch, and how long have you been doing that?
Sure. My marketing plan tends to be wrapped up very closely to my business plan. At the end of the year or very beginning of the new calendar year, I will take a look at, what my goals are. Like what are my productions? So I knew in 2018 I was going to have a book come out in Q1 and a book come out in early Q4. So and then I have to map out, well, what do I do in between? I can't just only talk about my books right when they're coming out. There has to be things to sustain interest and gain followers and build excitement throughout, and so it becomes a lot of filling in holes and then just trying new things.
Are you on Facebook and Twitter and
Yep. Yeah, I do those, the big social media.
And why don't you give us out your Twitter handle and
Sure.
other social media where you can be found at?
Oh, absolutely. On Twitter, I'm #1,000,000 words all together, and then on Facebook, I'm 1,000,000 words spelled out. Unfortunately, Twitter didn't have the spelled out one available at the time. Otherwise, on Facebook, you can just look up David Michael Williams, author.
And you have your own website? Do you have
I
a
do.
blog on there?
I do, yeah. David-Michael-Williams.com, although 1,000,000 words with hyphens.com will get you there as well.
Okay.
Because it's a publishing company, there's been, for me, do I have a separate website? But since I'm only doing my own things at this point.
so you're not publishing anybody else's
No,
stuff?
I've had people inquire.
Oh, absolutely.
What are
And
your thoughts on that?
that I spend a lot of time thinking about that because I've helped people self-publish, and get their books ready to self-publish as a side gig. I still put that money toward 1,000,000 words, my company, but I don't put my company's name on it anywhere. And for me, it's a very big step. And what prevents me from saying, okay, well, Dave, 1,000,000 words helped put out this world, the Great Depression memoir that my friend had written, is I don't necessarily want to open those doors. I'm a publisher because I'm a writer who wants to have his books out into the world. I'm not a publisher because I want to spend my time publishing a ton of things. So in some ways it's a little bit selfish because the more I'm doing, the production side of things, the marketing side of things, the less time I have to create new fiction. So my writer time shrinks. So if I'm going to be what they're calling now these hybrid publishers, where I have my workflow set up, I can help other people get their books out. I'm just a little bit too selfish with my time because then I'll be a publisher, not a writer.
Well, yeah, you said you have a book out first quarter and fourth quarter.
Yes.
Those are pretty big books. How much time do you spend writing? Where do you do it? What's your schedule? You work full time right now.
I actually have 3/4 time now. On
Okay.
Tuesdays, I work completely on the 1,000,000 word side of things.
So Tuesday's an 8-hour day on that
Yes,
side.
yep, and then I get a few hours kind of other evenings after I pick the kids up from school where I can jump in and answer emails and be active on social media. The other side of why I haven't opened 1,000,000 words up, because I'm part of a writers group. I know there's some really good stories and people who want to have books out, and so I'm always happy to help as a resource. Hey, let's go have lunch and I'll talk you through the process. Or if you need someone to be your proofreader, I'm happy to do that. For a certain cost because that's taken away from other sides. But because I'm still learning so much on the marketing side, it is such I work in marketing as my day job, but book marketing is an alien compared to some of the other, B2B and business to consumer type marketing. It's becoming an accepted business model, but there's a part of me that's like, I don't want to have this beautiful book come out with your name on it and then no one buy it.
Yeah.
Because I don't have the formula yet. I don't have the inroads yet. So I feel like I need to maybe get a little bit farther along with my own stuff before I could turn the page, so to speak.
Right. So that somebody comes to you and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to take this and I'm going to do this for you. Because there's risks in anything.
Right.
So.
And I know my publisher is an Amazon associate, so they have some pull that a normal person wouldn't have in Amazon. So
Right.
when my publisher has my book, they're able to give it a little boost too.
Right.
That a normal person maybe, just putting out their own book isn't able to do.
Yeah, so it for me, I would just feel but it's a viable business model. You're hearing the term hybrid publisher.
Yes.
You're
Oh,
hearing
yeah.
so many people do it. We will get you this great book, and then you're on your own, or we can make some suggestions, but we're not doing the marketing. I just feel as though maybe that's setting someone up to fail, or I just feel I feel bad.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is good for some people. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a way to get your book out. It can be a step, but at that point, then you become trying to. It's not a vanity press, but you're still those people trying to make money
Right.
from the writer.
Oh,
not from a
absolutely.
reader,
It's
right?
very close to the old vanity press model, except you don't, because of print on demand, you don't have to have boxes and boxes of your own book in the basement.
Yeah.
So yeah. And again, it comes down to everyone's individual goals. If I am someone who I wanted to write about my grandparents because they have this great story, and I know I want all my cousins and aunts,
Yes.
You
and
just
the
want a
book
book,
needs
yeah.
to exist. Why not? Like
Right.
that. But if you're trying to be a commercial success, if you're trying to build a business that is
Yeah.
profitable, I just struggle a little bit with that. Maybe someday, but right now I have too many stories I want to tell, and I don't want to take any more time on the production side if I don't have to.
Yeah, I definitely see people that have maybe stories, maybe they're kind of the memoirs, or there's some people that have their poems and they collect it, and then they have like a Kinko's, which is fine,
Yeah.
a spiral bound, but for the same price, go through CreateSpace or go something, and you could have a permanent bound book. So why don't you tell us a little bit how you got started writing? How did you get interested in writing your, say, genre, but you kind of mix them all together?
I do. I started writing very straightforward sword and sorcery fantasy because that's what I grew up enjoying reading. Before I knew fantasy was a genre, I'd be watching certain cartoons. I'd be certain comic books would appeal to me more, and I didn't know the term science fiction necessarily or fantasy. It was just there were certain supernatural things going on that I found fascinating. And then, I think it was probably high school I discovered Dragonlance books, which are kind of Dungeons and Dragons based fiction.
Yeah.
And I never had played Dungeons and Dragons at the time, but I saw a book with a dragon on the cover and some warriors, and I'm like, well, what is this? So I picked it up, and I wouldn't have said I was a huge reader before that, but after that I certainly was. Paired with that is, I think I've always had just this innate need to storytell, like the storyteller in me. And before it was writing, it was drawing pictures or play acting with, action figures or Legos and just telling stories that way. But I think, as high school went on, I realized, these are not going to last. Like if I'm drawing out my story and then throw the, and it's just this scribbled mess or this convoluted, it is impermanent. So I needed something to record the stories that I was coming up with, and writing was the most efficient way to do that. And at the beginning, I thought I'm an idea guy, but I don't really have the writing chops. Like I'm really just detailing things that happen, but I'm not thinking in the first act, second act, chapter, novel series. My brain just wasn't working that way. So then it was freshman year of college that I really kind of made that decision of I really enjoy this. I want to tell my stories. I think I'm getting better at this writing thing. So I majored in English. I did a couple independent studies where I worked one-on-one with a professor, and actually the very first draft of some of the early parts of my first novel, Rebels and Fools, came out of that. And it was teaching me to chapter a week, well, that's writing on a deadline. Getting instant feedback and putting myself in the reader's shoes, something that I think is very difficult to do. I was exposed to it very early on because, I had a built-in beta reader in that professor, and certain words that never would occur to me that didn't make sense or wouldn't be the right one to use, or it wasn't conveying what I thought it conveyed. So it was a very good educational experience, and I just never stopped writing from there. It was one book into the next, and helped me build up sort of a quote-unquote back catalog. So then when I got to the point of, okay, I'm ready to publish these, enough time had passed where I could be very unbiased on it. It actually,
you go back and read it later.
Oh, absolutely. The first novels in particular, they were so bloated. They were like, when you start writing a book, I don't know that there's anywhere that tells you, or unless you specifically think to look for it, well, if you're writing this genre and this is the first book in a series, it should be this many words. I think you probably could find websites now, but
Yeah.
at the time,
Yes.
I just thought I'm going to write the story that needs to be told. I'm in college, and there's, the more pages, the better for college assignments. So it was 175,000 words for book one.
That's huge.
Wow.
And I cut out 50,000 of those words before all is said and done.
That
Because
hurts.
it didn't, though, because it made it better.
Yeah.
And with so much time passing in between, I really felt as though I was an editor looking at someone else's work. It was an
Nice.
earlier version of me, so I could be very impartial and just, in some ways, merciless to make
Yeah.
it the best story it should be.
So, do you have a group of beta readers now?
I do. Of course, there are certain family members that get to see stuff earlier.
have to?
Yes. My wife is my alpha reader, which in some ways is an unenviable position because she sees the worst of my writing. She sees it in its roughest form. And then when the finished product is done, she feels she's already read the story, or things may have changed in some significant ways, but in her mind, the first time she read it is the story. So I always feel bad because she's doing me a huge service, and there are times where I'm kind of grumbling, writing down notes like, no, she's wrong, I'm not going to do this. And then a couple of days later, I look at it and, she's right.
Yeah.
So I would say my wife, Stephanie, is my alpha reader. I belong to a group called Allied Authors of Wisconsin, which is kind of a southeast, kind of Milwaukee-based. A lot of the members are in Milwaukee. I'm in Fond du Lac, and we're getting more and more Fond du Lac members into the group, so we're kind of spreading. But it's a writers group where we will bring in chapters of a work in progress or a short story.
Do
So
you
you
guys
actually
meet in
meet-
person?
yeah.
We do, yes.
Oh, wow.
And I think there's a lot of, I know things are going more and more electronic.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredibly helpful because you can find people who are in your genre. You can find people who are farther along, a little not as far along as you. But this group, I think, is in some ways incredibly special, not only because it's one of the oldest writing collectives, so there's a lot of longevity in the group, but it's in some ways a support group in that everyone genuinely wants everyone else to succeed. And I think every once in a while, whether it's like I'm thinking of some college workshops and things where it's fun to tear down because it makes you feel smart, and I think there are people who approach it as in an almost condescending way. But I think at Allied Authors, everyone is really and it almost always is punctuated by it's your story, do what you want to do. This is just my opinion, and I think I've become a much better writer because I've been a member now for more than a decade, and they read If Souls Can Sleep.
So do
They've
they
heard
read the
it.
whole thing, or just certain chapters that you might be struggling with?
No, you can kind of do it any way you want. I've always liked to do it chronologically, and there are challenges. And I always say, like, "Oh, you poor people! Like this book has it's a complex novel. It's a complex series, and if you're only hearing it chapter by chapter once a month,
It's hard, yeah.
details fall." We have a website, where members only can kind of go in and see outlines and try to refresh their memory before a meeting. But given those constraints, I still think it's incredibly valuable. There are people who are writing in my genre, and even those who aren't can help with things like word choice or like that. Just you lost me here, and in some ways, like writers are very good critiquers, but I also think we've had spouses sitting on meetings and people who aren't writers, and sometimes readers give you even better feedback than the writers do because the writers, well, this is how I would approach it.
Right,
The readers
yeah.
like
Yeah.
I just think the story is cool at this part and this didn't work for me.
Tell us a little bit about where you got the 1 million words.
Sure. So 1 million words. Actually, the gentleman who invited me to join Allied Authors, Tom Ramirez, he always had this joke about how anything before your 1 millionth word is just finger
Oh, yeah.
exercises.
Oh, yeah.
It's like you got to do a million words and then your stuff will start being good. And so he challenged me on that because he met me as a fairly young writer and he had many books out by then. So I did a tally. I went through all my word
my
docs. I'm
gosh.
like, I got to see if I've done it, if I'm there yet. And I was
Yeah.
happy to report at that point, even I had crested the 1 million words mark. So
Think about that.
yeah, so I don't know. I think it's a fun proverb, but
Yeah.
everyone
but it's something
everyone
to
is
keep in your
different.
mind, I believe.
That
Instead
you
of
need more words to
it's-
just smooth it out.
They've started writing, they wrote their book, and then they're like, here it is, here's the next
Right.
greatest American novel, and
Well, you hear things about like an author's voice, and when I first started out, I didn't really know what that meant.
That's a tough thing.
I didn't really, it's like I have a story I'm going to tell, and I think as time goes on, you develop habits. And I don't think that means you always have the same voice or but I think there are certain things you look at and you're like, oh, I can recognize that this is the author of the book because of how they're telling the story, their, way of weaving the language. And I do think that if, maybe it's only 500,000, I don't know, but I think you have to put in a lot of pages before you start to understand your voice as an author. Otherwise, it's a little bit, you don't have that same finesse. So that was part of it. It was almost an inside joke of the, 1 million words. And then, lo and behold, they say the English language has roughly 1 million words. And so I just thought it was, and actually I was using 1 million words as my blog before I had anything out, because they tell you build your writer platform before you even have anything to really contribute or sell. So I was writing my blog, and a lot of it was writing tips and kind of audience to other writers, not necessarily readers.
How often do you do a thing on your blog?
I will do a monthly blog post.
1 month?
1 month, so about roughly 12 year, sometimes I'll deviate and there might be more than one, or I'll do a short one, but I think that's really all people would need to hear from me. I'm not gonna put things out superficially, so I try to be strategic and try to add value where I can. So once a month, and I used to write a newspaper column, and so for me it's like I enjoy that creative nonfiction, and it's a slightly different way of writing, so it's something I look forward to doing.
So if somebody were to go to your blog, what types of articles would they find?
Well, more and more lately, I'll still put things out there about, it's more not necessarily as many writers' tips as I used to, but I do think writers could appreciate it as well as readers, because I try to explain, like, well, this is what it's like being a writer. This is what I'm doing now, and this is why I'm doing it. But a lot of it now is more focused to people who have read things I've written, so they can keep up with, well, what my projects are and what the next major release is going to be, but what other events am I going to, and things like that. So it's in a bit of a transition phase of kind of a wider audience, but more focused on what I'm producing versus just maybe more conceptual writing.
How many words do you write a week? I'm still stuck on this. I'm going to have a book first quarter and fourth quarter, because it takes me forever.
So when I was doing my business plan for 2018, I realized that this was going to be a very production-heavy year. I could have just done one book release a year, and put the next one out in 2019, the third book out in 2020, and then I would have had more time for writing. But looking at what I wanted to accomplish, I knew that I was going to do almost no new fiction writing this year, which is a little depressing on some level, because
that's what you
as a writer,
do.
that's but you have to weigh these things, and I decided that because the Soul Sleep cycle series is somewhat complex and there's a lot of moving parts, I didn't think it would do me any good to try to squeeze another project in between. So I decided to be a little bit more aggressive with the publication schedule, so I could get that out, so readers wouldn't have to wait quite as long for the next installment, and I could,
because they've got that world in their mind.
Right. So if I have 9 months in between releases versus 12, 15 more months, it's helpful for them. It's helpful for me because I can stay entrenched in the world and make sure there's continuity, and I'm getting following up on themes from beginning to end, and it's a comprehensive, satisfying series. So it was a sacrifice. I did squeeze in a short story though that I actually got really good feedback on, and people are like,
"That should be." Put that on your blog, or?
I did not, because I have ideas. They told me, like, well, that would be a great chapter one for your next novel, and I have other ideas. I'm like, okay, well, it's good to have options, and I have a handful of short stories. I do mostly long form fiction, but I have a handful of short stories that I think are with a little bit more polish, would be maybe a nice collection. So then, well, maybe that's maybe that's the end of 2019, or maybe that's early 2020. So it's always just my spreadsheet is just insane. I don't know how many tabs I have, but one tab is all the things that I'm doing all throughout the rest of the year.
So you're doing it on Excel? I
am. And then there's things just more broadly, like, well, I know the third book in the series, If Dreams Can Die, is coming out spring 2019. So right now it's just one line, but when I get to there, it's going to become 50 lines of more, probably, of tasks that need to be done in order for that to be published. So it's I just put ideas of, like, well, this is happening, this is pending, this might happen maybe someday there'll be audiobooks. Maybe someday they'll be translated into Spanish. So I have like kind of my stretch goals and wish list. So there's always
But
something
you're
I
gonna
could
have
be
to do
doing.
that yourself because you're the publisher, right?
True. Except, you know, I have I'm blessed to have a stepmother who speaks very well Spanish. She's Mexican, so she has even offered to do some translating. So
Nice.
like that could be an option, and then audiobooks, because they're skyrocketing. I'm definitely keeping my eye out on that option, and I know Smashwords has a partnership. And I use Smashwords as an expanded distribution for ebooks, so I can hit Kobo, iBooks, Barnes and Noble. And I was looking at the different models they have for there of, you know, you can do a flat fee or you can enter in this partnership, but it seems like there's some upfront costs there, where again, I'd have to do some more research and evaluating and see, is this going to help? Is the cost going to be worth it? But I expect I'll probably be dipping my toe into that at some point, just because it's an exploding.
And then somebody else would be reading your book, like
Yes.
on
Or the
Smashwords.
author could read it.
The author could read it. I've, again, done plenty of research, and there are people who said no matter how, you know, airtight I tried to make my room and the equipment I got, it just did not have the quality of professional voice actors. And that's something that any, you know, self-published or indie published author needs to decide, is how much are you willing to do yourself. And for me, it's like there was no doubt in my mind that I was going to find someone else to do my cover. I am not a graphic designer.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
work and have worked with incredibly talented graphic designers, and I think it's very easy to spot when an author tries to stretch beyond their skills.
yes.
And I
The
mean,
cover was it for you, huh?
the cover, it's like, I mean, the cover is your biggest marketing platform there is. Maybe, I mean, arguably even more than the title. So I knew I wasn't going to try to do that myself. I wasn't going to be my own proofer, because I'm never going to find my missing words
That's
or
true.
repeated words or
So do you hire
homophones.
that out, somebody?
I do. I do have someone who actually is doing it as a passion project. So again, I can save a little on cost there. It's something she wants to do and kind of maybe build a portfolio. So we're helping each other out at this point. But audiobooks, I think even if I invested in the right equipment, you know, even if my voice is pleasant enough for someone to listen to for hours after, you know, hour upon hour, is that where I want to be spending my time?
Yeah.
So it's a time-money balance. So I think there are people who have it down to a science, who are incredibly skilled at it. I think that's something that I would be more inclined to outsource.
So with indie publishing, you have the advantage in that you have the control, and you don't have to worry about, you want to have an audiobook, you don't have to worry about somebody else. You can make that decision.
Right.
And on the other hand, you will have to invest. It's a money investment.
Oh, absolutely. And there are people who, you hear horror stories of like, I hate my cover art. Like, I hate it, but the publisher knows what sells, and it's like, how much control are you willing to give up? For me, if I don't like something on my cover, well, my cover artist is someone I work with at a marketing agency, I can just holler across the hall and say, can we try a different typeface? Or I'm thinking, you know, we need to try this instead. And
Yeah, I don't have any control over my cover. They show
Yeah.
it to me and they're like, this is the cover. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay.
And
And, you know, maybe you hope they do know what they're doing.
and it might be obvious right by now, but I'm a little bit of a control freak. So
No,
for me,
never.
it's I'm, you know, no matter what, I'm in control of so much of what I do. Unfortunately, sales are not something I have direct control over. The marketing I do, but not how many books I actually sell.
Yeah.
But everything up until then, the successes are mine to claim, and the failures are mine to claim. So
what are some of the ways that you sell your book? I know you went to the Fondue Fest
yes.
recently.
So every year when I'm doing my business plan, I look, okay, what was successful, what seemed to work. Well, with the Renegade Chronicles, I tried some very grassroots marketing efforts, and by grassroots I mean free. Like, I didn't want to throw any money at it, because anyone will take your money pretty much, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to be very stingy and try these free options, and wasn't really getting too far with those. But what I did find was that in 2017, most of my sales were from face-to-face events. And what I'm finding, so then 2018 became the year of event. I'm going to go to conferences, I'm going to go to community events, Fondue Fest, the Wine Walk.
Nice.
And I'm actually finding that events that are not necessarily book focused, these just wide events where there's other crafters and food vendors and things, I'm selling more books at those. So is that because there's not as much competition. There's not two people on either side of me selling books.
Yeah.
Or is it just the sheer number of people that go to a community event versus a book related event? So those are the things I have to think through, but I definitely know I can safely say that if you sell books at an event where people are drinking wine, you will sell more books. That is what I have learned. People are a little bit more liberal with their spending once they've been, had a few libations. So or if you're going to have an event as an author, give away free wine. I don't know.
That's legal.
Probably not. Don't. Please consult your attorney.
Luckily, he has an LLC that protects them from.
Sorry.
Good point. Got to research.
So we've been talking to David Michael Williams. Thanks for coming in today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
And if somebody has any questions, how should they contact you?
Probably my website, david-michael-williams.com. I have a contact form there, or shoot me a direct message through social media. I love connecting with people. I love learning from others, and I certainly will share what I know, and hopefully that will be of value to someone.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. If you'd like to be on Author Showcase, please contact us on our Facebook page or at oshkoshauthorshowcase@gmail.com. Otherwise, continue the conversation with Dixie and Tom via social media. Look for Dixie by searching for Daisy Jericho, and please check out her books, The Love Thief and Sparks Fly, on Amazon. You can find Tom Cannon on many types of social media, and please check out his book on Amazon, The Tower of Apathy. Our goal is to introduce local authors around Oshkosh and hear their stories. We want to thank the Oshkosh Public Library and the Friends of Oshkosh Public Library for supporting the creation of this show. If you are a writer and are looking for a community, we suggest the Oshkosh Area Writers Club and the Lakefly Writers Conference, held each May.